Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. It is Wednesday, April 10th, 2024. This is the weekly JupyterLab call. I'm Jason Weil. Thank you so much to the, looks like 10 people who are joining us today. Please sign in on the HackMD if you haven't already. Thank you to everyone who's already been adding quite a lot of things to our agenda here. So why don't we start with Mike? Mike, go ahead.
Right, let's start with an announcement. JupyterLab 4.2 Beta 1 has been released. Thank you everyone who contributed and reviewed pull requests and contributed features and bug fixes. I believe that all the major features that were planned and were ready for review by the deadline have been merged. There is an exception of a few pull requests relating to accessibility where the authors of those pull requests are no longer able to continue work and address there is some reviews to be addressed. I think that there is a consensus that we will work on these things, but because they require quite a bit of refactoring, this might need to end in the next point release. Um, so I will be writing this down and bumping to 4.3, but if anyone wants to discuss that in more depth, I guess we can um, meet on the accessibility call. And if Gabriel has anything to clarify or doesn't agree with my points, I'm happy to discuss it quickly today um, as a like ad hoc release planning check. And if you have a pull request which you hoped to go into 4.2 and it wasn't merged yet, and it's not a trivial bug fix, please do let me know. I we have quite a few pull requests in um, review, but I think that most of that is covered. So I'd propose that we announce that today and try to publish that on social media and forum, etc. For that, that would be great if we could have the user-facing changelog in. I think it's pretty thin on the text, but ready for review. The pull request is linked in the agenda, and I'm also linking that in the chat. Um, is there anyone willing to review?
I could take a look at that.
Thank you. So just once it's approved, I will still have to change the URLs. So don't merge it just yet. For one of the bug fixes, which might actually end up added to the user-facing changelog afterwards, is the fix for some characters being non-accessible on non-US/international keyboards because we have shortcuts which conflict with specific keyboard layouts. And the pull request which fixes that by, I think, cleverly using on before input event is now ready for review again. And it briefly watches for the on key down event as before, but before executing the command, it checks whether there would be an input introduced, and if the specific command is configured to not prevent the default behavior, it will yield allowing users to type even like arcane or very specific characters which might conflict with some of the shortcuts that we ship by default. That's not the ultimate solution. The ultimate solution would be to better distinguish the keyboard layouts and possibly adjust shortcuts. And some IDEs do allow to choose the keyboard layouts, even the web IDEs, but there is just no way to read that automatically from the browser, as we discussed previously. So moving on, my last point is that I've made a few pull requests and one issue related to Jupyter AI completer, and I would highly appreciate a review. But briefly, the idea is that there has been quite a lot of feedback on a few things. One is that the same models which are good for chat are not necessarily best for completion, and it would be good to annotate them so that we have two lists, one for completions and the other for chat. And the other thing is that there are some models which do not work very well with LangChain and like a different API. So on Jupyter AI, I propose to change where we allow to customize the methods that the providers or implementers of custom providers can customize. And finally, there is an issue proposing to add a new default shortcut for accepting the inline completions, because the default one that we shipped in 4.1 with, I think, alt and slash, which is not very convenient. And I would propose to use tab, which is the default in other environments. It might be slightly confusing because we also use tab for the tab completer, but it doesn't strictly conflict with it, because you either have the inline completion or don't, and if you have inline completion, it will accept the inline completion. But it's possibly like slightly controversial, so I'm curious whether anyone has opinions on that and could comment on the issue. I would appreciate that as well. But yeah, also any feedback on the pull requests from maintainers of Jupyter AI would be highly appreciated. So that's it from me.
All right. Thank you, Mike. Any questions, comments about those? Okay. Zach is up next. Go ahead, Zach.
Hey. Long time no see, this group. Good to see you all.
Good to see you, Zach.
Yeah, so I've been spending quite a bit of time in Jupyter Collaboration. And one of the things that have come up is there is an issue that is pretty damning in the Jupyter Collaboration repo that says if you turn on Jupyter Collaboration, it breaks everything, plugin wise. And it's because there is this challenge with the contents API in JupyterLab where you have competing drives when collaboration is on. There is the contents REST API, and then there is the RTC, the Y-Doc, Y-WebSocket APIs. And in order to distinguish between which one you want to talk to, we use this prefix on the file paths. And that prefix is the culprit of breaking everything. We depend heavily on the file path and a lot of other contexts. And when you start to add something like a prefix to the path, other things don't work. The short-term way around this would be to truly, and this is what happens in Jupyter Collaboration, is we swap out the file browser so that the paths don't have to have a prefix. But that breaks everything else because things like the running tab don't get updated to know what drive you're using and so on. So there's not a consistent drive being used across all plugins. You're getting this mix of drives. And so it was proposed that we just allow the default drive of the content service to be configurable. There's a deeper issue here that the default drive is an implicit drive. It's an implicit path. And you're swapping, all we're doing is cheating by swapping out the default drive by swapping out what the implicit paths mean. I don't know if we want to continue down that road because it gets the implicit nature of it leads to really unexpected behavior in plugins. So I have a PR, a draft PR, and it's in a draft state because of this problem. I don't really know what the right answer is here in the short term. What's been brought up, and I think Fred Jeremy mentioned it, and then Fred reinforced it, and I agree with it, that there's this bigger question that I was hoping to avoid because I just wanted to solve the Jupyter collaboration problem, which is all of this is really plagued by the fact that the service manager, the thing we use and pass, the singleton we pass around the whole application that talks to the server, is essentially hard coded. I mean, you can try to create your own JupyterLab app with a new service manager, but it really requires you to write your own app. There's no pluginable way to replace the service manager or replace parts of it. So there's an issue that I linked to that Jeremy opened about playing around with the idea of creating a pluggable service manager, something that you could swap out different parts and control very acutely how you communicate with the server or other services through the service manager. That's going to be a challenging effort because it's building that in a backwards compatible way. It's just going to be really, really subtle. And I'm willing to go down that route and try to do that with folks. So the 2 points that I have here is about the default drive and the contents API, and then a super deeply coupled related issue, which is about the pluggable service manager. And maybe I'm asking like Jeremy or Mike or others who have maybe thought about this. Is you want me to bite off this bigger chunk and go after the service manager? What's kind of the sense there? Or is there a first step of just allowing the default drive to be pluggable in the near term? And I could do that in a better way than I've done it in that PR. This was more of an exploration of what we think there, or is it we want to do all the things first? And I understand if that's the answer, because we are going to increase the API service here, which makes it harder to do the pluggable service manager in the long term, the more we increase that surface area. So I'm fine either way. Just one is obviously a lot more work than the other. So I'm really looking for a temperature check and see what would be the best way to spend my energy going forward.
So, yeah, there is indeed a risk of having to continue maintaining this new API if we add one for the drive name only. And there is also a need for like being able to customize many other things from the service manager, which is the reason why we have this issue around there. There is also another issue I think that you opened a while ago that was about disabling the default polling of the kernel manager and also the service manager, the session manager, which could be also solved with a more pluggable service manager. So every time we want to do something to the service manager, it's kind of coming back. So that's why it's like maybe we should try to fix it once and for all. And to give a bit more context also, there was a previous attempt by Darian, who I think solved this problem in a way that is backwards compatible, but I think it was abandoned because it was treating the service manager as a special case. And I think at the time we were trying to think of a way to have the plugins, all sit at the same place. But maybe like thinking more about it, maybe we need to treat the service manager as a special case for now, and just to avoid breaking every extension around there, because we can't have a breaking change there for sure.
Right, because it kind of is a special case, right? It's not you almost need it before all the other plugins because a lot of other plugins depend on it. So I mean, and maybe it's an equal plugin, but it has to be the first one loaded.
Yeah,
I don't even, so
they depend on it because they can access the service manager directly from the app, um,
right,
and not
right.
via like the plugin system
It's not a
where you would
token.
require. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it would be a token, a regular token. That would make things much simpler because you would just require, for example, a default drive, a name or default drive, and then you could do whatever you want with it. So the same with the kernel manager, but the problem is that like with the current state, it's gonna be hard to keep this API, like the app.service manager, and not break extensions because they expect everything to be there already, right?
Right.
In their activate function. That's the main issue for sure. And I think the approach by Darian was to, I think, have some special types of plugins that are only meant to extend the service manager. No, actually, it was just replacing the whole service manager via a specific plugin. So it was just like a single plugin that would replace the whole service manager via an extension. So maybe something like this is what we need. I
Yeah, and
don't
I
know.
see Nick is saying there could be a new event called services ready, but that's still backwards incompatible, right? Because you would need other plugins to call services.ready and await that, or add a new field that replaces activate.
Right. Instead of activate, you could have, if you didn't know about service manager changing, you could have pre-activate or pre-service or something like that and get a slice of that. You wouldn't be able to ask for anything as a dependency that didn't also register that behavior. So you couldn't have if you were going to do a plugin, you would need to split brain that for pre-activate. We can't call it that. It's got to be something else. But whatever. Let's say it's called pre-activate. Pre-activate requires pre-activate optional, pre-activate all the other stuff. Just duplicate everything so that existing stuff just assumes that service manager's there, and it is. But that whole configurable API is available during the pre-setup thing, and then it could shut off APIs once it's activated or once it's initialized. Although I'm hearing the gears in Mike's brain twist and turn on that of, would this then possibly be dynamic? I don't think so. I don't think you'd be able to dynamically reconfigure stuff. I mean, you could defer things behind existing APIs, but you wouldn't be able to change the architecture of the application and its relationship with the server after it was loaded. So anywhere there was already an asynchronous API, you could plug into that. But like, does it need to know how many drives? No, wait, I came in a little bit late. So you were talking about iDrive. iDrive is a feature of Contents Manager, not Service Manager.
Correct.
That's
But you can set
orthogonal.
the default drive at the service manager level and it'll get passed down. But that's not helpful to me either, because how do I would have to rebuild a new JupyterLab app to change that value on the options of the service manager. Like that's the thing that's really damning here is like maybe we make the name a token, and you could swap out the name, but it would still be at runtime before the app is created, or I mean after the app is created, that you would swap out default drive, and that's where Fred was pushing back. I guess I don't feel that. I feel like, I don't really, maybe it's because we have the word default in it, that setting the default drive is at runtime feels problematic. I don't mind switching it right dynamically. I don't really have a problem with that, but I don't have a full context here to know where that would be bad.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, anytime we talk about setting a default, we need to think about there is a default. How can we add more? How can we add n? Not one, but n. And is there a situation where n is 0? Right?
Yeah.
So that's a very anyhow.
Right.
But
Right.
yeah, I think that service. I think having a new flavor of plugin that gets you access to Service Manager in a pre-init state is fine. Like a bunch of things won't work, you know, like you. So if you do that, then you can't assume that Service Manager can fetch anything,
Right.
right? You can't assume, and that API would not work while it's not initialized. You know, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that seems like the most plausible thing to me. A new kind of plugin that extends Service Manager, you know,
Only.
service something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this is that's all great. I'm on board with all this. I feel very unqualified to do this particular work because this is not uh it's a little bit of yeah. I'm new to the JupyterLab core code base in this way. So I'd love to see this land because there's a whole thread of other issues. Yeah, join us. Whole other thread of issues that a pluggable service manager. I mean, I know JupyterLite. I have looked heavily at JupyterLite's mocking of the REST API. I wrote an application that tried to provide Notebook v7 that was locked down to not touch a lot of the APIs. All it wanted was to do a RTC experience. So all it needed access to was the YDoc endpoints, nothing else, no kernels or anything. So I basically had to write a service manager, a new app with a service manager that mocked all those APIs, and that's why the polling issue was a behavior, Jeremy, as you mentioned. So I'm on board with solving and fixing this problem and spending the time to do it. But it'll, you know, this is definitely not an area I feel super comfortable. So I may fumble around a little while and send out some really ugly PRs if folks are willing to go there with me.
Maybe there is something to do with the PR that Darren opened a while ago, and maybe there could
Yeah,
be a good starting point and
yeah, that's a good
see
idea.
if we should just revive it or maybe uh, do some modifications to it.
Okay. Is it
So
closed? Like, can
It
I?
is, yeah.
Okay, okay. I'll go dig
It
it.
might be linked from the the issue about splitting the service manager into multiple plugins. The one you posted in the agenda, I think. It might be
Okay,
linked there. Yeah.
okay, cool.
I do not see how any of what we discussed addresses the issue that if there is a default and multiple plugins come and try to set that default, it's an undefined behavior. And should we possibly think about going the other way and making a service manager a special case, but not by adding a new plugin type, not by doing that kind of on runtime, but like we have the stanza, JupyterLab stanza in package.json, which can be used to modify which plugins get webpacked. And maybe that's something like an entry point on the level earlier up in how we build. I don't want to use the word build, serve the application, so that by the time when we come to build, sorry, not build, wrong word, to initialize the Jupyter frontend, we already swapped the service manager. Does it make sense?
I think it does. So it requires somebody to essentially still construct a whole new service manager. Like it's not a pluggable thing. It's you bring your service manager and we can load it as through an entry point into the
Yeah,
app.
yeah, this kind of solution. I'm not saying that that's a better solution. I'm saying that's an alternative to consider.
Yeah. And you're right. This doesn't solve the like last write wins problem that we're going to have. And there's actually like a subtler problem with the contents derived problem, right? There's like this implicit versus explicit path. I almost feel like we need the server to have some knowledge of some way to work with the client to know about drives, because, and we should always pass an explicit drive to the server. I haven't thought through that that's an offhanded statement, so I haven't thought through the consequences of that, but it is really, really troubling that we can have the same path mean two different things. And
which is coming back kind of to my pull request against Jupyter server, which I hope will get a review on a similar problem, but on the server side, where I don't know from the front end, given a path from the kernel, where does it belong to? Is it on the kernel, on the server, on a remote kernel, etc.? So yeah, I'm all in for like larger refactor of how we think about paths.
okay,
One of you guys
this was
would want.
go ahead, Eric.
Sorry, I was going to ask if one of you would. Does anyone mind briefly giving a little context about what the Service Manager is and how it works?
Yeah, sure. So
for the YouTube video in particular might help.
Yeah. So the Service Manager is like the interface to the server, the default interface to the server. Fetch with your cookie, and it just has APIs that are already set up to talk to the individual services of the server. So the contents API, all the REST APIs. And it's very opinionated to speak Jupyter Server REST API. That's the troubling thing here, is because it is, and it's for all practical purposes, it's a singleton that gets passed. You can access it from any plugin through the app, so it's extremely useful, and it's going to be used everywhere by all the plugins. So that's why there's such a hesitancy to break it. That if we change its API, the impact of that is pretty. It's felt across the ecosystem, so we can't really do that. So if we want to change something from underneath it, we kind of have to do it underneath the public API. I think we're limited to that without doing something really major from a release cycle perspective.
And I guess then it would be used by the front end side of plugins and the back end side for server plugins.
Well, so the it doesn't, the server doesn't know anything any better. It just receives requests coming in from the client. This just happens to be the public API we expose to make requests to the server really easy. So it's all on the client side. Like there's nothing configuring the Service Manager from the server side, other than you have to tell the servers or the Service Manager, that lives in JupyterLab, what your URL should be, like your base URL and any proxy components you have. But that's really the only thing passed between server and front end Service Manager. So Service Manager really is just the front end's way to talk to the server. Was that a good summary for others in the room? I like it.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. So it's really essential and really core. Sorry, I was reading Mike's comment here.
Yeah. So the comment says that if I was designing a new plugin architecture, I'd think that Service Manager enables a lot and possibly too much. And in a sense, if you ever wanted to have like a more granular permission system, I want this extension to have access to that or that, which is of course not a good idea given that we are on the front end and everything is possible. But if we wanted to have some kind of filter on extensions, like you are allowed to access these plugins, these services, maybe it should be good to split it up into smaller chunks. But that's of course either a breaking change or having to parallel plugin systems.
Yeah, and to be fair to the service manager and the developers of the service manager at the time, the reason the service manager felt like a safe play was we had the REST API. This was the underlying assumption is that we were just talking to the Jupyter Server REST API. There was a deep coupling between Jupyter Server and JupyterLab, and historically that made sense. But now we're starting to challenge that in many, many different ways. Everybody's trying to create other interactions with the server that sit outside the core REST API. Jupyter Collaboration being a very simple example of that. Yeah, we took a lot of time here, so I'll happy to give it back. Thank you for letting me just brainstorm with you all on this. I'll think about it some more and maybe try to draft up some ideas based on what we talked about, and throw them probably at the issue that you opened up, Jeremy, around the service manager. I'm going to leave my PR kind of in draft state and the contents API just as reference for a little bit as I'm thinking more about this, but and then we'll probably close that in favor of something more expansive. But yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think it's fine to leave it as a draft PR because it also showcases or at least it shows a use case for having something a bit more easily configurable for sure.
All right,
Nick, would you
awesome.
I was going to ask
Go ahead.
Nick if he would mind explaining again his suggestion about a new type of plugin.
Sure. So we register a plugin. It's got a thing called activate. So we could have another kind of plugin that was prevented from having activate. So there would be a disjoint type, and it would be pre-activate, which was, again, the naming convention that I rejected already, but I don't have a better one right now. And so the life cycle would be apply all the imports from wherever, manipulate the whatever goes into this thing. And maybe it's more than service worker. Maybe there are app level APIs that are only available at this time, right? Who knows? And all of those run before the application even starts to try to start. And then it tries to load all the plugins that are not of this class. But it would be the same. You wouldn't change your API. You wouldn't change package JSON. You wouldn't have to change anything. It would just work a little different on those kinds of plugins. And yeah, downstreams would have to adjust to that, right? Because that stuff happens kind of before you get to like properly typed whatever. It's all happening out in that index.js and all that nonsense. So it's kind of bad. It would effectively have a second application running inside your other application, which we already do over on JupyterLite because we start, a quote unquote server, which is, we don't even try to turn on the application, look at settings, anything like that until that fake server is running. So this is not insanity, but in the JupyterLite case, we would have then three separate times that things could fail. Is probably the way to think about it, because we would inevitably get this wrong the first time.
I was curious about why you were saying they would not have an activate.
Just from a lifecycle perspective, that the general case that folks use is to create a DOM object that's just a plain old JavaScript object. That's the plugin, but it is possible to write them as classes. And so if you're thinking about state, there would be state that you would be unable to access because the application would not be ready. So it's probably easier just to say, if you have a plugin that you want to change the service worker in and a plugin that's going to use that change service worker, you make them two plugins that you ship in the same extension. But otherwise, we can't reason about anything if you're gonna do like fancy handles and stuff like that. Now, you'd still be able to depend on this is the other reason you want to be exactly the same thing. They would still be able to expose tokens, they would still be able to depend on other things, but now you'd have this other class of stuff that's the strict subset. But a downstream plugin of your service worker customizer plugin extension factory would be able to depend on that token. So, you know, first the graph is empty, then you fill the graph with pre-initializers, they pre-initialize, and then you fill the graph with things what require pre-initializers. But, you know, then are we going to need pre-initializers next month, you know, something like that. So it would really have to be quite limited what it would be able to do. And then to the points in the chat, like ideally that pre-initializer would not be able to make requests to the server, but this is JavaScript. You can't make anyone not be able to do anything, right? They can just window fetch and you're screwed. So don't bring the word security into this discussion. It doesn't change anything. There is no security in the browser once it's in the JavaScript scope. You can't, just don't bother.
So I kind of am thinking about this as I'm not sure how the extension and plugin search lookup process is when everything is loaded. I'm kind of thinking of this as like a pre-process to the existing plugin extension search and lookup process. Is that kind of accurate?
That's another place where we can't really touch anything. So that's what I'm saying. You'd want that Jupyter config data JSON. So if you open up JupyterLab and you view source and then you look inside of that, or you open up Jupyter Lite and you view source and you look inside of that, or you open inside Notebook, old Notebook, there's a Jupyter-config-data ID script tag in the head. That is the configuration of the application. The server's on the hook for delivering that, but if it's not in package JSON, we're not going to parse JavaScript on the server. It's not. So it has to be in schema constrained JSON or we can't have nice things.
Thank you.
All right, we are at about a quarter to the hour. Eric is next up on the agenda. If anyone else has something you'd like to talk about, I'll drop the HackMD link in the chat once again. Eric, go ahead.
Cool. So I have a link to this in the HackMD notes, but I've been wondering whether we can make a service account for Read the Docs that has access to a bunch of the sub-projects as Read the Docs so that we can automatically pull CSVs. So if we, so the link on the HackMD shows you an example of what I'm working on currently, but gives you basic stats and you can download a combined CSV for each project to look at what popular pages are in the documentation. So anybody have thoughts about making a service account for Read the Docs and giving access to server and lab and notebook, et cetera, so we can pull these CSVs down? If anybody has any thoughts about that, please share. And the next thing is, and actually this is kind of a question because Carlos and I have both been working on some utilities. Mine is the metrics and Carlos has been working on an issue aggregator for documentation. And it looks like our GitHub pages URLs for our sub-projects, I think they are not working because I believe they're taken over by Jupyter.org from the main sub-project. So I'm not sure if anybody has any suggestions or information about how that's being done right now. But I think like it would be nice for the sub-projects to be able to use our GitHub pages URLs, but I think it's just being taken over right now by Jupyter.org at the organization level, something like that.
So JupyterLab.github.io is that the URL that you are speaking of?
Yeah, I think it's those sorts of or those kind of sub-project URLs, I believe. Yeah.
So that one was active a few years ago, but it was disabled because there was a cost in maintaining, pushing the builds to both the static website in the repo and the API docs on the docs. I don't know if it's possible to reuse that URL to point to a website which is hosted somewhere else.
I think in particular, we were planning to use docs team. I think it's docsteamcompass.github.io. It would be something similar, that sort of URL for the docs team compass repo, but I don't think it's possible right now because of the URL goes to jupyter.org. If I have
Got a little follow on to that regarding docs and stuff. Finally got all of my Veil plugins. Veil's a Go-based tool for grammar, spelling, whatever checking. And finally landed the Open Office dictionary in there, so you can use that. You can kind of install that. And then the style guides from Microsoft, Google, Alex, I don't know, Write Good, I don't know. There's just a bunch of them. So those are now tools that are available in heavyweight docs authoring environments in CI, stuff like that. It also has a language server. I haven't explored that as much, but now that it exists, we'll try and get that up in LSP because that would be amazing.
cool.
All right. We are about 10 minutes till the hour. Any other topics that people would like to discuss on the record? All right, well, hearing none, thank you all for participating today. I'm going to stop the recording. Brace yourselves in 3, 2,